Hey y'all, it's Erin, aka Grishno, and it's time to fuck gender again. Alright, so this is the second video in a series. We already talked about how to subvert gender through the use of language, and today we're going to talk about how to subvert gender every day in 3 easy steps. Number 1, define gender. Gender, the state of being male or female, typically used with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. So what that means is that gender is really based on social standards of what a man or a woman should be perceived as. And in order to dive a little bit deeper into this, we're going to move on to step 2, define the current status. Right now, our society defines gender as a binary, meaning it's one or the other. It's male or female. It's not both, and there's nothing in between. This is problematic in that it denies the reality of what gender actually is. Gender is much more fluid than society might let you believe. Recent trends have begun to describe gender as a spectrum between male and female. I prefer to think of it as a 2-dimensional spectrum, where one can choose how masculine and how feminine one might identify, and based on that, find out where they belong on this 2-gender spectrum. The other thing that's important to know is that gender is assumed. So when you're walking around on the street, you might see somebody approaching and automatically, through social cues, identify them as either a man or a woman. That's what we're taught to do. That's how we're socialized. The reason that this is a problem is that it removes individual autonomy in determining one's gender identity. So it's my responsibility to determine if somebody else is male or female when it should actually be theirs. Which brings us to step 3, subvert gender. Step number 1, don't assume someone's gender. This is important. Gender identity is a very personal thing. It comes from inside somebody. It's not always expressed visibly. And that's why it's important not to assume. Which brings me to step 2, ask everyone their pronouns. This is one of the most important things you can do to subvert gender. Ask everyone their pronouns. Don't assume based on how they look that you know their gender identity. Just ask. And if you ask everyone, then it becomes the norm. And if it becomes the norm, we subvert gender. And that brings me to the third point today, live openly and authentically. You may think this is important for only trans or gender non-conforming people, but this is important for everyone. Every single person has a gender identity. That identity may be the sex that you were assigned at birth, and that's okay, that's wonderful. It's still an identity though. But it's important to recognize that there are others out there whose gender identity doesn't align with their sex assigned at birth. Their gender identity may not even align with current gender categories. And if we can all live openly, authentically, and honestly as ourselves with other people, asking our pronouns, respecting our gender identity, we are going to destroy the current definition of gender. And that, my friends, is how you subvert gender every day. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, I'm Grishno, and I'll see you later. Oh, no. Sorry. Fix all that. Alright. Step number 1. A fluid system of personal identity based on how one, I don't know, does stuff, feels like. What is gender? And that's just how we're trained, socialized. That's how we're something. That's how we're taught, I guess. This is, I'm sure it's important because it removes my ability to determine somebody else's gender identity and places it's not a burden on them. It places the responsibility, it's not their responsibility, places the honor of identifying their gender identity on them. That's what it does. That's what it does.